You may not have noticed, but I certainly have, all those religious issues that surfaced during this past summer. My religious antenna never sleeps. This summer seemed especially interesting in that the age-old tension between religion and sexuality was rekindled in this, our modern and sophisticated age. Sins of the flesh remain a religious concern and, I guess, also a party platform for the Republicans. Reaching for forbidden fruit will result in additional layers of guilt, shame, and rebuke. What started innocently enough last summer in 2011 has tipped the scales of absurdity this summer in 2012. Just last month, Kevin Yoder, a congressman from Kansas, apologized for swimming nude in the Sea of Galilee the summer before. Now, mind you, this is not a councilman from Berkeley, California, or an assemblyman from Fire Island, or someone who just got back from, Burning Man or something like that. This is a congressman from Kansas with all the trappings of solid American family values from deep in America's heartland. And he took a brief detour from his fact-finding mission to Israel, went skinny dipping in the same lake where Jesus is said to have walked on water. A furious Eric Cantor, the House Majority Leader, forced his apology. Now, this became a religious issue mainly because it drew some scholars into the fray. One perspective is that swimming nude in the Sea of Galilee honors an old tradition. Don't forget, when Jesus was performing his miracles on the water, bathing suits were not yet invented. That's a shocker. Jesus bathed in the nude, and fact checkers corroborate that theory. These days, religious people dismiss fact checkers and refuse to imagine their God without dress. In artists' renditions of John baptizing Jesus, Jesus is always fully dressed, and John wears only a loincloth. Not true and utterly ridiculous. If you're wearing the only clothes you have, you remove them, bathe, air dry, and then put on the dry clothing. Makes sense, doesn't it? That was a fun issue to tackle this summer. And in case you weren't aware of it, I was glad to expose you to this. Another issue, just about as much fun, another issue. 6 years ago, a nun from the Order of Sisters of Mercy, Margaret Farley, wrote a book called Just Love, a framework for Christian sexual ethics. This nun took on the Kama Sutra, sexual desire, and our yearning for pleasure. Nuns are somehow different from how I remembered back when I was a kid. Sister Farley is, in fact, a retired professor emeritus from Yale Divinity School, past president of the Catholic Theological Society of America, and an award-winning scholar. Her book, Just Love, came out in 2006, clearly under the radar until the Vatican finally got a whiff of it 6 years later. So this summer, the Vatican's Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, the same office known in the 16th century as the Inquisition, censored the book, causing it to rise to 16 in Amazon.com. In a stultifying church environment, where celibacy is glorified and women can't use contraception, homosexuals are deviants, the divorced can't marry, and sex is for the purpose of procreation only, Sister Farley made it clear in her book that there are many wonderful reasons for sex besides making babies. And in that book, she also made a case for same-sex relations, for taking self-pleasuring out of the realm of taboo, and for remarriage after divorce. She wrote, "When it truly becomes impossible to sustain a marriage relationship, the obligation to do so is released, as when in the Middle Ages, a broken leg made it impossible to continue on a pilgrimage to which one had committed oneself." The Vatican proclaimed, and I'm going to quote exactly what they proclaimed, "The deliberate use of sexual faculty outside of marriage or procreation or on one's own is wrong. Homosexual sex acts are deviant, and marriages are, by and large, insoluble." Now, the specific religious issues that were raised as a consequence of the Vatican's delayed critique of the book were twofold. The relationship between pleasure and sin, and let me tell you, the papers and essays were humming all summer long on the relationship between pleasure and sin. And secondly, who decides what people are allowed to read? So the battle between sexuality, seen as temptation and weakness, or as a gift for enhancing relationships, persists to this day and probably will in the foreseeable future. Now, the issue of who controls the books the faithful are permitted to read has a long history as well. In the Reformation, Protestants were persecuted for making the Bible available in vernacular translations so that lay people, not only priests, that lay people had access to the Bible and, oh my goodness, could actually read them themselves. In 1559, the papacy issued its first index of prohibited books, which continued until 1966. After 1966, the church still retained the right to dictate which books are appropriate or inappropriate for Catholic instruction, and of course deeming Sister Farley's book, Just Love, as inappropriate. The authoritarian impulse to limit the mind of their followers. It's not just typical. I'm not picking on the Catholic Church. This is an example. It's really typical of fundamentalism near and wide. All faiths that tip towards fundamentalism really want to control the mind. Of course, when liberals hear this, they like to gloat. They become instantly proud of their free religious heritage and wonder why there aren't more people just like us. After all, who wants to be told what they can and cannot read? Who wants that dark cloud of guilt to interfere with their sexuality? We are free from all those irrational rules. But the last issue from the summer that I want to raise flies in the face of such reason, or so it seems. Using the Episcopal Church as a model for a once traditional Christian faith that made a conscious effort to become more progressive, the statistics on membership released this summer raises some very troubling conclusions. Since the 1960s, the Episcopal Church has grown flexible, so flexible to the point almost of showing an indifference towards doctrine and dogma. They've grown friendly to sexual liberation in every form and unafraid to speak out on secular issues, defending the rights of the poor, oppressed, women, gays, people of color. In fact, one could say sometimes it feels like they're almost indistinguishable from Unitarian Universalists. Yet instead of attracting a younger, more open-minded demographic, the issue this summer came after the Episcopal Church released their attendance figures from the last decade ending in 2010. Some call it a decline. Others refer to it as a collapse. The average Sunday attendance dropped 23%, and not one single Episcopal diocese in the whole country saw a church-going increase. Now, this decline is manifest in practically every denomination, including very much our own. Unitarians, priding themselves on offering unadulterated freedom from everything, and therefore relevance, one would think, to younger generations, in fact, all generations who have a desire to live unfettered by dogma, Unitarians find their membership figures on a steep decline as well. So honoring the free mind apparently has not paid dividends. As we know, the most successful churches are conservative, who preach a gospel of wealth rather than the full New Testament message, imploring us to be responsible to those who have so little. But perhaps, this is some of the issues I want to raise this morning for us to kind of percolate on for a while. Perhaps it is our own good liberal ideology which has prompted this sad decline in liberal churches everywhere. In an interview with the Episcopal Church's presiding bishop, Catherine Scory maintained that her members valued the stewardship of the earth too highly to reproduce themselves. Oh, God. It feels like the same dilemma that confronted the Shaker community. Remember the Shakers? All right, they were into monastic life and no reproduction, and they were really pretty strong for a while, but just recently I learned that in the entire country they found 5 Shakers still together living in Sabbath Day Lake in the state of Maine.